And Shan, you say the police chief's testimony is crucial for the prosecution. Explain why.
They need to get that testimony in to show how Chauvin was violating the police procedures and training. And that's critical to all of the convictions, but it's particularly critical if they want to convict him of that second-degree murder charge, because that's really going to be a high burden. They need to convince the jury that he knew that he was committing a crime. So the first point is you got to get to the point of he had to have known. No reasonable police officer would have thought he was complying with police procedure. That's what they're setting this foundation for with the chief's testimony.
You know, it's interesting, Van. I read a commentary that suggested that policing itself is on trial here, but the chief is saying no, emphasizing how many police policies Chauvin broke according to his point of view. There is, of course, a difference between violating policies and knowingly committing a crime, and that's what Shan was just talking about.
Well, first of all, I hope every police officer, every police chief, and every police commissioner in the country watches this police chief. This is the professionalism that people have been begging for 20 or 30 years, at least in my career. He showed an understanding of this balance between trying to, keep order, but also trying to keep the trust and respect of a community. You heard him talking about how to deal with people in distress, how to deal with people from the LGBTQ, gender non-conforming communities. He had a level of command over the full range of what you want from modern policing, and it was on full display for the world. If every police chief acted like this, and every police officer followed the rules and the policies and the training from a police chief like this, most of what you see happening in the country wouldn't be happening. And so I thought that, my mouth was hanging open. Is this guy from Hollywood? Where did we get this police chief? And the idea that I understand now why he had no hesitation about firing those officers, because none of what he's talking about were those officers doing.
Shan, it's interesting. We've done this a lot. We've covered a lot of trials, and there's obviously been a lot of attention on the issue of policing and potential abuse of power by police. I can't recall ever seeing a police chief testify against a former officer. It doesn't happen that often.
I agree, Jake. I think it's very rare. I think this police chief, I'm not sure the timing, but he did testify, I think, in the case also in Minneapolis where that officer had shot an Australian woman in an alleyway. But I agree with Van. He is really an example of what we would hope you would see from police leadership. He's unafraid to call out what he sees as wrong, as completely unjustifiable. I thought it was really interesting about this notion of police culture. One of the things that he did admit to was that police officers do get irritated with citizens properly using their First Amendment rights to film them. I think that's an interesting display of what happens in that police culture, because that's something they should be trained on. That shouldn't be irritating to them. That's not obstruction.
Yeah, and Van, yesterday I spoke with Minnesota Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who's obviously one of the many people watching this trial very intently. I want you to take a listen to what she had to say about the emotions that she and the community in Minneapolis, St. Paul are going through.
It's been, re-traumatizing. It's been really hard. I've tried to avoid watching. I know a lot of us here in Minneapolis have done that, but it's hard, right? You also want to know the details and want to hear from the witnesses.
Our own Nia Malika Henderson wrote a very powerful op-ed about how she's not watching the trial because it's triggering, to use a word. You've talked about the emotional stress of this trial on many Americans, especially perhaps in the black community.
Well, it's terrible. And I think that for those of us, African Americans and our allies who, when you see a George Floyd and you see, all those community members standing there, you're seeing your friends, you're seeing your family members, you're seeing yourself. And the idea that a year later, we're still trying to figure out, was this a crime? It just takes a lot out of you. And we just said, these are police officers that have body cameras. Why should they be mad that civilians also have phone cameras? This, you're dealing with a clash over and over again. And most of the time, if you're African American, you know, no matter what you have done or who you are, you're going to be on the losing side. And so to have this, over and over again on television is very stressful. I will say today, they didn't have to rely so much on the videos. Today was easier to watch because you have a police chief acting like a chief of police, not somebody who's going to be, the excuse maker in chief, but who's going to be the chief of the police and the person who's going to make sure the police obey the law as much as the citizens obey the law. Today, I think, was an easier day to watch than the others.
Van Jones, Shan Wu, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. Some medical experts say the United